All right, why don't we sort of just start off with some general background, whatever. What do you know about how the station actually started down here? It was Marconi?
It was a Marconi site first, and that would have been Marconi's first transoceanic message, I believe, was 1907. 07. Teddy Roosevelt was president because the first message across the ocean, Teddy Roosevelt sent to King 1907, it would be Edward Albert, Bertie. Yeah, Bertie died in 1910, so Prince King, well, everybody called him Bertie, Elizabeth, Victoria's oldest son. Anyway, he sent a greetings message from the United States, and then they sent one back. And of course, that came from was from the Marconi site in Truro, right? Or was it Wellfleet?
Well,
you know, yeah, right. And they got all that information up there about that. But then they started these buildings down here were started about soon around that time. Then RCA bought out Marconi.
Why did they move it down from Wellfleet to Chatham?
I'm not so sure that they didn't have transmitting stations up there because they had many other transmitting stations besides this one at that time. They had the big Marion plant, which had several of these big towers. Dad worked at the Marion one for a short period of time before they sent him to Chatham to work at this one. So, and that was after World War I because Dad had to get out of the Navy in 1919, I guess he got out of the Navy. Yeah, because it was the year after the war was over because he was still ferrying troops back. They were ferrying troops back home, and flu victims of the 1918-19 flu epidemic were unbelievable. And then they sent him down here. He got his electrical training in aboard ship, and became an electrician and generating power plant operator aboard the Agamemnon or the Leviathan. He was on either one of those ships at different times. And then RCA hired him on the basis of his abilities to run the power plant. So they sent him down here, and that's when he started. And that would be about 1922, possibly 23, because he married Mother in 23 or 24, and he'd been here a couple of 3 years by then.
Is that how he first came to town, was working at the station?
That's right, yeah.
So that's the only reason you're here is because your dad worked at the station? I mean,
that's how they got married, yeah. And then my older brother was born. He was born when, let's see, 1920s. I think, yeah, he was born, Dad was still working at the radio station. And he was born in 1924, so he's still at the work. No, 20. How old is he? My brother was born in 25, I think that's right. Anyway, he was born a couple of years, before Dad left the RCA station and went to work on his own garage business.
So what year was it that your dad first got here?
I'm not positive of the exact year, but it would be about, because I haven't got any information about when he left the Marion plant and came to Chatham. I'm guesstimating about 1922, and I won't be more than a year off, one way or the other, 23, 24, because he married Mom in 24, and Earl was born in 24, 25, I guess 1925, Earl was born, my older brother. And then after Earl was born, he left the RCA station, got tired of him, and went into automobile business, Slim's Garage, which remained his business for 42 years, I believe it was. So, but while he was up there, of course, he met a lot of people, a lot of men that were Chatham people, because they have quite a crew, as you can see here. And so, where shall we go from there?
Well,
what was job there?
Yeah, I mean, he was hired after. Was he a soldier in World War I?
No, in the Navy.
Okay.
The Navy in World War I.
He was in the Navy.
Yeah.
And he was on
board ships. Yeah, and transporting troops, which was pretty grim.
Yeah. Maybe you could just start out, talking about how we sort of covered this a little bit, but
yeah.
Maybe you could start out, just so it can stand on its own, actually say in there something about your dad, like my dad first came to town. Just sort of word it that way so I can edit it on its own.
Okay, well.
And then we can start at the beginning and tell me about, what kind of work he was doing there and what kind of business that the RCA actually did down
Yeah,
here, what
okay.
they were.
Well, so when he started to work for RCA, he was moved to Chatham.
Could you actually say, I usually don't direct people this way, but could you actually say my dad?
Okay,
just so
sure.
I don't have to explain.
Yeah, right. My dad, everybody's known as Slim when he said that. He came to Chatham about 1921 or 22 to work at the RCA station in Chatham Port, which RCA had recently purchased from the Marconi radio company. And he was a power plant engineer up there, ran the power plant, and which generated the high frequency, high voltage spark gap transmission in those days. It was all ICW, which means Morse code, and dots and dashes, generated by a very high speed, high frequency alternator, powered with a diesel engine in the power plant, which still stands at the corner of the entrance to Riders Cove Boatyard and Route 28, and that power plant building is still there, and that was his home office, so to speak, while he worked for the radio station, and along with many other men, as many as must be about 20 odd there, and probably not all in the picture.
I would imagine most of those guys are probably ex-soldiers, just like your dad was.
Well, they're all about
Were
the
they
same.
in service of the?
They're all about the same age, except the little girl standing on the back step there. Some are older, but most of them are 30s and 40s, I'd say. Dad would have been that because he was born, he was 13 and 26, he went in the Navy. So yeah, Dad was in his 30s at this time. So the other, this I say, on this photograph here, I only know a few of these people because this is so long ago, but they're the people that worked up there. And so from there on in, it was a matter of, working for the radio station. And as I said before, he got tired of I don't know exactly why, of working for RCA and went into business for himself. Left the radio station, but the station, of course, was operated, if you want any more on the station, it was operated all those years right up until just MCI bought it, and MCI closed it down, 5 or 6 years ago, or 7 or 8 years ago, something like that.
What type of work did your dad actually do on a day-to-day basis? Like when he got up in the morning, what was his day-to-day activity?
Day-to-day activity was to go right to the power plant. I don't know whether they broadcasted 24 hours a day, but they certainly received 24 hours a day. There's somebody on duty at the desk all the time taking incoming messages, because their basic job of the RCA station was communication with all the ships at sea, primarily, obviously, the Atlantic, because, as a matter of fact, they were in touch with the ship that was picking up the survivors of the Titanic in 1912. Yeah, and this radio station was in contact not with the Titanic, but with the ships that were out there picking up survivors, and their radio. See, because everything relayed, because we stick so far out in the ocean, that this is the closest proximity you can put a land-based station to cover the North Atlantic, and that's why it's here. And so the station was in operation all through the 20s and 30s and 40s. The Navy took it over, and we had a raft of naval personnel in town. They took over the Hawthorne Inn, which is now defunct. It's now the Hawthorne Motel. The inn was a 3-story wood frame building, much like the Chatham Bars Inn, but not quite as big. And that was their barracks, so to speak. And there must have been well over 100, mostly men, but there were a few what would be waves, naval waves with the Navy's female
You're talking
counterpart.
about the guys that were stationed at the naval. The Naval Air Station.
No,
out there?
that's World War I, and that closed in 1930, 31. Or maybe even before that. I tell you, Bob Hardy's the expert on the Naval Air Station, but it was closed because I remember when I was a little kid, Dad drove over there and we looked around. Some of the buildings were still there. They'd taken the big hangar down because it was a liability to leave it there, And but the guardhouses were there, and some of the buildings were still there. That's the Naval Air Station had no affiliation whatsoever with the radio station because that was World War I. The Naval Air Station was built primarily for that, and as soon as the 30s I don't know whether they closed it before the Depressions hit or not, but Bob Hardy would know. Anyway, that has no bearing on it. But back to the RCA station here, it was, I say, a military operation, and of course they changed it. By that time, the broadcasting bit was still, much more, let's say, much more updated and much more sophisticated and much better. But they still use nothing but code, ICW, because that's foolproof about making mistakes. Over the air, words can get mumbled, jumbled, and you make mistakes talking, or you can misread. But when it's coming out in dots and dashes, because you don't want to make mistakes when you're sending military messages and things, because that's not good. And so it was. They had radio operators up there and everything, because a shuttle bus used to go by here every hour or so, back and forth between the Hawthorne Inn and the radio station, shuttling personnel back and forth. And so that was, and the station was very busy, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know militarily speaking, but it had to be, because they had to warrant having all those sailors and officers and stuff to man the place. It had to be effectively used, and I'm sure it was. And after the war, of course, it returned to the RCA's, its civilian, all the ships at sea status. So I kind of don't like to use that phrase, all the ships at sea. Sounds like the radio announcer. The newsman, I forgot his name, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, they went back to that business, and it was, as I say, operative up until about the time that RCA sold it to MCI, and I'm going to guesstimate and say that was 10, maybe 12 years ago, I think, more than I think of it. It's quite a while back. And then it just became defunct, closed, and they've emptied all the buildings of all the stuff. They're just empty. They moved out all the equipment and everything. So Fletcher Davis' father worked over there. He'd be one that could perhaps tell you more about the more current. His dad went to work there in the 30s, I believe. Lewis Masson, right next door, well, at least up on the hill, he was an operator there for quite a few years, radio operator. And you probably know him. He's the guy that plays the pipes all around. And he was a radio operator for a long time right here. And I'm trying to think of anybody else that has worked there. So I say recently, but before it closed.
Did your dad tend to work there late in the night? Did they have crazy hours
I don't
like
know.
that?
I don't know what his hours were. Operating the power plant, he must have had someone with him or someone working with him, because you can't tend the power plant. You can't tend it, the engine stuff, the 24 hours a day. I mean, and yet it's got to be running most of the time. There may be a time when they weren't transmitting, say from like 12 to 4 a.m. They would not be on the air. But what I imagine he did was he could, when they knew what was going on the air, they would, as I say, someone was always, almost invariably, within hearing of messages coming in. And anything going out, I don't know whether it went out immediately or not, because I just don't know. But the power plant had to be, activated. The diesel had to be started and everything in gear, and then they could transmit. But it wasn't anything like picking up your modern day phone and just pushing the buttons and talk.
Did the guys who worked there tend to be people that were here for maybe 5 or 6 months, or were they more long-term?
Oh no, long-term. You're talking about civilian personnel, of course. Yeah, well, because military, who knows? Yeah, these were all Chatham people, but I don't mean that they all came from Chatham. They were RCA people, some of them, and some of them, you had to be a licensed operator in order to be an operator. You had to have a radio transmitting license, which meant you had to take an examination from the Federal FCC, Federal Communications.
So was your dad a licensed operator?
No, because he was a power plant engineer, and that's a different thing. He
didn't. Like they all did.
No. He was just, his job was to make sure that the generators were going and that everything was working in working order so that they could transmit. And they had those huge 300-foot towers, and as I say, there were 5, I think. I believe there were more than 4 or 5 of these monster towers, of which I have a picture of that last one there. And they must have stretched almost up to the East Howard line. They went up through the woods, as I told you earlier, and Then they took all those towers down except the one here. And that one, I wasn't here when they took it down, but it wasn't, maybe 25, 30 years ago, they took the big tower down. That was the remaining one on the top of the hill there. And that was quite unusual.
I remember just a few years ago, there was that one down in the marsh here.
With the bird in it, osprey nest
There
at the
was
top?
one that was right along on the ocean, on Writers Cove side of the road.
Yeah, the derrick.
And then there was that one over on Forest Beach, right?
Oh, those, okay, yeah. Well, if you remember back then, that one big monster tower was the big tall one, was just a shaft, as you can see with guy wire.
I remember that one.
There were no other towers I knew of anything except those look like oil derricks that are still there. And I don't know why they're still there. There's one at the Writers Cove Boatyard, and there's the one across the street. Well, you know, it's right beside the road, the one that had the osprey nest in everybody was so excited about a while back. But there are none of those derrick towers on the other side of the road. They're all on this side of the road. And I think those are the only two, I believe. And they're still there, but I don't know why. But I don't remember any other single mast. They may have had a small mast up, but small by comparison to the one I'm thinking of, because they could have been a mast up by the transmitting house, the operations building, I guess you might call it. And I probably paid no attention to it because it would have been minuscule beside the other one. It was so big.
How old were you when your dad was working there now?
I wasn't even born.
Oh, you weren't born then?
Oh, no. He worked there in the 20s. That would make me 80 years old, and I haven't quite made that yet. No, my brother, as I say, was probably about 3 or so when Dad left the radio station. And of course, he wouldn't remember much about him working there either, because at 3, he did. I know that he was up there a lot, playing with other children his age, you know, little kids that were. Well, Matt Turney's daughter, one right there, he had a daughter, and we called her Tootsie Turney, and they were playmates. And Tom Cave has a number of daughters, 2 or 3 daughters, and Paul Carr, of course, his only son, Paul Carr, died of cancer not too many years ago. He was a classmate of mine in high school. As I say, the only one that I know of now that has a working parent from the RCA station is Fletcher Davis. And he lives on, I can never name it. The road comes up from the Fish Pier and crosses 28, you know, whatever.
Shore Road?
No, it's the one that comes out at the Fish Pier,
right.
you know, goes up.
Old Harbor? Or,
No, crosses Old Harbor. Yeah, okay, well, anyway.
Old Wharf?
Oh, good grief.
No, that's different.
No, it's
Connecticut.
No, it's the one that Songus' house is on the corner of.
Yeah, I know what you're talking
Barcliff Avenue.
Yeah, okay.
There we are. Finally, those are senior moments with me. You have to stop and scratch out the names, and he's the only one except for Louis, who of course worked there in the 60s, 70s. Yeah, 60s and 70s. Louis Masson worked there, and. Matter of fact, I think he retired with RCA. I'm pretty sure he did. And he knows all about the contemporary operation of it, having been there. But there's nobody else I know of that is around here anywhere that has any information about the radio station. Certainly not in the time we're talking about, in the 1920s.
Did the people that work there have a big impact on the community here? I mean, were they fairly involved, or I mean, did it
no
affect
more
the
than
economy at all, having a place like that down here?
Well, you see, you can look at the place and see how many homes it had. It has, what, 5 cottages? They call them cottages, but, you know, those brick houses are pretty permanent. And those are all for RCA employee families. I mean, you know, and then they had the bachelors. The big building is the hotel, they call it. It's the bachelors' quarters. And that's exactly what it is, a hotel for the men that were unmarried. And then if you were a lucky one and you got married, and maybe I shouldn't say it quite that way, but anyway, you know what I mean. There would be, if there was a vacancy, you're eligible for let's call it their base housing, which of course must have had a lot of freebies a bit too, because of taxes and stuff like that. I'm sure that, in other words, you're living on company property, like on the military base, so to speak. Only it wasn't, of course. And those houses there, they sit. Tragic. They're all empty and wasted. You could use them for many, you know, elderly housing or low rent housing or something. Now the town owns everything up there, but there they sit. But as I say, I don't know how many of these guys were bachelors, but Dad was at this time, and I got a picture of the guy. This is a kind of a fun picture. I'll show you.
Yeah, you know, actually, maybe we could go through the photos and
Sure.
I can get some close-ups later, so you don't
Yeah.
really need to show it to the camera. But maybe you
Yeah.
could just go through them and tell me what sort of what they're about and stuff.
Well, this is Dad in the operating plant. Look at the size of the flywheel on that diesel engine.
Oh, that's your dad right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the control panel, and the generator's on the other side, but of the picture there. But I say you can do those later on if you want. And this is Slim or Dad at the switchboard, so to speak. And
Who took these pictures? Did he?
RCA sent them to my dad years ago, and I put them away. And then when Dad died, I dug them out of someplace and said, "I'm saving these." And I did. And this is the. It's kind of hard to figure the perspective of that mast, but now you can see there's the Derrick one with and this is the one up on top of the hill. It was so big. I don't know that you remember that or not. It must have been 20 odd years ago they took that down. But and what I was getting at was the picture of the. This is kind of an interesting one here. This is the operating room, operations. This is there where all the men sitting at their desks with typewriters and headsets on, what have you. And
so those are the guys on
those
the board.
those
those
are the guys.
writing it down,
Those are the guys receiving the messages, and yeah, I can see have 4 or 5 of them are wearing headsets, and you know, and taking messages, and other guys are typing out things there. You see. But what I was getting at is, here's the one. All the boys studiously inclined playing billiards, what have you. This is in the hotel down the main floor, see. And I don't know, reading the newspaper or whatever, there's a billiard table back there. This is where the bachelor men stayed, in that big building right on the state highway. That's just another picture of the operating room. This is the article that Timothy Wood did, 20th Century Nostalgia. He printed up, but you don't. Those pictures didn't come out very well. Maybe it's the copying machine. And 2 pictures of the group. That one. These are the men that work there. And here they are, and they're more or less dressed up. That's kind of funny. The father's, being the tallest one's always in the back row. Yeah, they put him in the back row in both pictures.
So did your dad make some pretty good friends while he was working there?
Oh yeah, he knew all these guys.
Yeah,
he worked with these guys, and I'm sure they all got along well together because there's no reason they didn't. And I think he was just not happy with RCA. That's all. That's why he left. They wanted to do business himself, which he did. And those guys, Tom Cave stayed there until he retired, and then there was Mr. Heiser. He was in, and the guy that lived on the oyster pond. I had 2 of his daughters in Nauset back in the 60s. Can't think of the name. Well, it doesn't matter. But he was one of the last ones that left there. I think he was one of the superintendents or something up here. But they hired, as you can see, about 30 men. And let's say that 15 to 20 of them were married with families, which, of course, at that age they would be. And the other 10 or a dozen or so were bachelors. And as I say, Dad was when he started, but he wasn't when he finished. So that's really about all I can tell you.
So you grew up primarily in the 30s, is that right?
Yeah, I was a little kid in the 30s.
What was Chatham like in the 30s back then?
Oh, dear me. Well, for one thing, right where we are, we used to come down here before the World War II broke out, and Ike Rogers lived across the street. We'd swim across here, and that was the Fisher-Eldridge estate across there. And there was nothing there except a great big brick carriage house down by the shore, and then one of the big houses is up for sale, the one on the high bluff on the other side, right on the entrance to Crow's Pond. And the Fisher-Eldridge family owned that whole thing. It's Harbor Coast. and we used to go over there and play in the empty houses. Nobody lived there. The houses were broke, wide open doors, no doors. We used to play hide and seek and everything. We've been swimming across here. And the reason this land here belonged to the Fisher Eldridge estate, that's where I got it. Because Dad owned half interest in this land. And at that time, this was where they would come and they had a fence around it and they'd leave their horses here and row across because it took them lots less time than take the horse and buggy all the way up around Riders Cove and then down the road and way back out this way again. You see, it took them half, 3/4 an hour. They rode across. They were home in 10 minutes from here, you see. And so that shows you one change. That as to what it was 60, 70 years ago as to what it is now. And oh wow, what do you expect? Chatham was 15, like 2,000 people at the most. Now it's what, 7,000 or 8,000 people.
Did you see a lot of tourists back then?
Yeah, they're almost all regulars. We didn't have many transients because the automobile, in the 30s was just getting to be used more and more, but it was still a long poke. It used to be a major thing if you were going to Boston. It was a kind of a day epidemic, episode, or whatever you want to call it, just to get there and back. But there were many people that came, perhaps I shouldn't say many, but a lot of regulars that had summer homes here. Not as many now, but for that time they constituted. And then there was always the hotel population, because you've got to remember, where we have motels today, they had hotels then, and the CBI was the grand matriarch of them all, of course, and it's still there. And but that's a whole other story. But then you've got to remember there's the Hawthorne Inn, which I just told you about, just down the street, 200 yards. And then further down was the Mattaquasson, which is a very popular hotel and quite large. And just before you get to Main Street was the Mattaquasson. And then there was the Seaside, which is, but those were Chatham's big.
Were they luxury hotels?
Oh, CBI certainly was. I would say that the Hawthorne Inn was, they were very respectable summer hotels for people to come and spend 2 weeks or a month. And often that was the case, they'd come down and spend a considerable length of time. And it wasn't like job the weekend, come down and spend the weekend in Chatham and drive back home again Monday. It's not none of that at all to speak of. And
were they generally upper class people, or?
Well, it had to be fairly well-to-do to be able to come down and spend a month in one of these hotels, because they were, for those days, you speak of the prices today would be meaningless because you can't compare the value of the money then, but compared to what it would be worth now. But they were comfortable, income. Of course, they had some of the other hotels were torn down. The Chatham Hotel over on the Eastwood Hoe was torn down very soon after it was built. But just to say, the railroad changed about, and in 1930s they stopped the trains coming to Chatham and ripped up the tracks back to Howard. And that, because there was no need for the railroad to come to Chatham anymore. The only thing it brought down was lumber to Nickerson Lumber Company, which is right on the railroad tracks down there at the end.
I thought that a lot of people, a lot of the tourists sort of depended on it to get here. I mean, otherwise
it was early on, because that's where the Chatham Hotel was built, because they could get off off the train in Howard and come across through East Howard through the woods and go right to that hotel, which was quite handy. But then the train transportation began to diminish considerably for that, and of course that hurt the hotel population, so to speak, clientele, and they didn't survive at all. But of course the CBI and those other ones have managed to stay alive these years.
Did you ever ride on that train yourself?
Oh yeah, I've gone to Boston on it. But in those days, you had to go to Hyannis to get in the passenger train. It was only freight came to Howard. Howard is where it stopped, North Howard. That was the end of the tracks. I used to go up the railroad tracks. That's where I learned to drive before I was even 16. Because I'd go down Stony Hill Road, cross Crowell Road, up by the cemetery. We got just past the cemetery, up there in the woods, You could hang a right, and you're on the old railroad bed. You could drive all the way to Howard, crossing Sam Ryder Road and the dump road and all that. They go right across and back at Chicky Clark's junkyard. We used to drive up there with no number plates and no license, but the cops knew it, but they never said anything. Well, it's like the kids today in these, what do you call these little ORVs that children have? They can't go on the highway, but they put around the woods, what they call those little scooter buggies they have with motors. And the train I've taken to Boston, it was stopped at every telephone pole usually, throw the mail and newspapers out, whatever. But it was the way to get there.
Did it take a long time to get up there?
2 hours.
It's not bad.
From Hyannis. No, that's not too bad. 2 hours. And made an awful lot of stops right in the South Station. Yeah. And after the 40s, train population, train travel, passenger travel diminished. Well, as you know, to practically nil because of the automobile.
So that station closed down in the 30s. Is that right? It was 37.
Which was that?
The Chatham station. Is that right?
Oh, you mean the railroad stations there? Yeah.
The depot.
The depot. Yeah. I remember just barely as a little kid going down there. The tracks were still there, and I remember seeing trains there. And I also remember my mother going shopping in Orleans and train going right across Main Street. Because the tracks went right across Main Street. Old Colony Way, the road in Orleans, that's where the fish market is. That's named Old Colony Way because that's the Old Colony train. It came right straight through, went right by Snow's Hardware Store, and then wound its way up through Eastham and up to Provincetown. And that was in the 30s. And so that branches off, that cut off, and I think around North Howard that goes to Orleans and then up the Cape to Provincetown. But all they lugged out of Provincetown was beach sand, carload after carload. Don't ask me where I was going, but they're making the world's biggest sandbox, I guess. I don't know. But and of course they carried lumber and stuff because you notice in Wellfleet, the lumber company is right where the railroad tracks went, right next door. Old Oscar Nickerson, he knew what he was doing. He built his lumber yards right by the railroads. Chatham, Howard, Wellfleet, and I guess that's still Nickerson's, isn't it? The one in Wellfleet? I believe it is Mid-Cape Center.
I think it's Mid-Cape.
Yeah, that's Nickerson lumber, Mid-Cape Center. Yeah, that's Jan's grandfather, Oscar Nickerson, and he's one of the many famous Nickerson personages around here.
You mentioned that there were horses, that the men were using horses quite a bit around here, probably in the 20s and stuff. Were there a lot of cars around here when you were a kid?
Most of the horse-drawn vehicles were gone by the time I can remember, the 30s, because everybody was getting into cars. There was only 2 or 3 people I knew that used horses commercially. One was Abby Donut, and he picked up trash with his horse cart and did all the stores on Main Street, which was kind of funny. He'd go around, and he lived right on Old Harbor Road, right across where Chase Chevrolet used to be there. Anyway, and that's when the town dump was right up here. And most people don't like it's underneath the Northport Variety Store, the town dump, back in the 30s. Because, of course, I live right close by, next to the Citgo station. I guess it's Citgo, isn't it now? St. Pierre's. Yeah. That's where I grew up in the house right next door. Anyway, that was the town dump before it moved into the South Chatham area. And they'd bring the trash there, and there's a good many tons of trash under the dirt of the Northport Variety Store, and what's the name of the Italian restaurant up there? You know the one I mean. Okay.
Campari's?
Yeah, right. And I remember going in there, and I was a little kid. I used to walk down the side Route 28, the horse tracks, going through the woods, so he wouldn't have to come out on the road with a horse and buggy taking stuff to dump on anybody else. There was 2. I think he had 2 wagons, and it was kind of funny because I'd walk down the horse track, so they didn't want me walking the road. Old Charlie Naylor was the dump keeper, and he lived down what we call the French Village, which is the bottom of the hill in Stony Hill Road, right down the bottom. That was called the French Village. The only reason I could figure that out is because both families were Naylor, and that's a French name. And Charlie and Fred Naylor lived down there. And Charlie was the custodian of the dump, and he was an old man. He smoked a pipe, and he had a car junk car sitting out there in the edge of the dump, and that's what he lived in. When he was at work, he'd sit in the car and smoke his pipe and watch over the dump, and then at night time he'd walk back down to French Village and go home. And I'm talking about 1935, 30, around there, 35, 36. And my dad's garage was right on the corner, and there was nothing around in the way of buildings to speak of there. Nothing in that section of woods there where the restaurant, furniture store, and all that stuff. And you could walk through North Chatham all the way across through the woods down there. Never a house, not a road. Now, it's subdivided. There just wasn't any. There wasn't very much here, like in the way of buildings, homes. Most of the summer homes were on the beach, close to the beach, which people preferred, obviously, to come in the summertime. And some of those were the ones that regretfully were put on sand, built, and I always maintained that the people like down the hallway in St. Andrew Harding Lane, when they were building their summer home back in the 30s, if they dug down and they dug in beach sand and started to put their footings in the beach sand, they should stop and think. Beach sand, where does that come from? The ocean brings it here. Well, if the ocean brings it here, the ocean can take it away, you see. But they built their houses there, and now look what happened, you see. The harbor changed configurations, and their houses washed into the ocean. The sea reclaimed, as you know, 200-300 yards down there, back into the ocean, because the old peat down below, where the meadow banks were buried under there, came back up again, and so that's what summer homes were. They were just built for the summer, no insulation, but some of them regretted where they were built.
Did you ever see any of the planes and like dirigibles that used to come into the air station?
No, it was closed down. It was all air traffic by the 30s was gone because they closed the station in the 30s. So, but I couldn't think who'd be in there. Joe Nick probably might remember. Yeah, Joe Nick would remember some of those seaplanes because he's in his 80s. You have to be 10, 12 years older than I to be that vintage to remember. Oh, and more than that, you'd have to be. The station was active in 1925, so I think that's when they began to shut it down. It was a big expense for in those days to keep that air station going because it had no function. During the war, obviously, it was a function. They went up there and looked for that German submarine in 1918 when they didn't find it. They said that somebody's going up there and throw a wrench at it. That was a funny story about the Naval Air Station. They had the bomb locker was all locked up, and the boys were all over Falmouth playing baseball from the team, and they hardly could find a guy to go out in an airplane and look for the submarine that shelled Orleans, in August of 1918 when the Germans fired on American soil for the first and only time. That was a funny story. Did see the Hindenburg, though. It was homing in on WCC, which is the call letters of this up here, WCC. And I remember one morning, I heard this droning in the sky. In those days, in the 30s, when you heard something flying over, you had time to go outdoors and look at it because it wasn't going very fast, And I went flying. It was out in the front of the house, facing the east. And I went flying out the front door, and I looked up. I said, "My God!" I hollered for my folks, "Come look, come look!" And they came out, and here's the Hindenburg coming right over Chatham. It looked like a silver-plated Empire State Building going overhead. That'd be just droning along like that. But I don't remember the swastikas on the tail. But I remember Dad mentioning. He said because in 36, it was the year it burned. I think it was 36. I have to look. It's 36, 37. Of course, Hitler was in power, and he had the big old swastikas painted on all the tail surfaces. But I wouldn't have noticed that anyway. I was only 6 years old. But you're speaking of aircraft flying over. That was a rather memorable one. Seeing the Hindenburg, and so it was.
How about the 40s? Were there a lot more tourists down here in the 40s? More cars?
But during the 40s, people came to the Cape. Those same people I talked about that had their summer homes provided, some of them had families that were grown up and in the military. But let's say Mom and Dad were like in their 50s or so, and their son or daughter were in the military. They would still come here. The problem was, of course, gasoline. rationing and tires. Tires were impossible to get during the war. I remember I worked for my dad in the garage in the 40s, and I was just a kid, but there weren't many young men around available to be working in the garage. And
Was
so
the town blacked out?
all on the shore side, yes. We had blackout curtains. Everybody facing that side. And they're particularly fussy, and they patrolled the beach all the way from the end of Monomoy, actually. Of course, blacking out there was just the Coast Guard stations. But they patrolled the beach all the way for landings, for fear of German espionage. And we know that certainly Germans landed on the beaches of Cape Cod, and saboteurs. They had to. And of course, a lot of debris washed up on the shore from ships torpedoed because they never told us about it. They never said a word about a ship was torpedoed. The Arizona Sword was torpedoed off of Monomoy, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember the location. And
The Arizona what?
Arizona Sword ship, and I believe that was almost positive the name. But you don't pick up the newspaper and say ship torpedoed off Cape Cod, but they didn't want us to hear that stuff. Obviously, the war on, they don't want to discomfort people, so to speak. You say with saying that.
And they knew the Germans would probably
have
access to.
Sure, because what they do is they lay offshore submarines with a periscope and just watch. And if the light's on shore, all the ship's blackened out, of course. I mean, they couldn't even light a cigarette on deck, or they'd have your head. And the ship would go by, and they'd see a shadow go across, between the land. And they didn't necessarily torpedo right then, but they could figure out how they're building up at Halifax. They're going to build up a convoy, because that's where all the convoys started, at Halifax, Nova Scotia. Then they'd send over 200 ships at a time from Halifax, or more, a big convoy. And so the Germans kept track on things that way. And of course, since nothing went through the canal, commercial, big freighters or tankers, that time, maybe, but I don't ever remember seeing anything like that going through the canal. But offshore, the main road out there is 9 miles offshore, the shipping channel, I think, I measured it one time on a chart. And they just lie outside it, and everything went by. If there's illumination background, they catch it, and so there's no question about them being off here during the war. But you asked about the business during the war, business of the town. I would say that the economy didn't suffer. Let's put it that way at all by the war, because people came down here, and of course we had a lot of military, the Coast Guard, the Navy. I'm talking about just Chatham. I can't speak for other towns, but and then of course we had the big radar site up on the top of the water tower hill, and that was Army. And some of those guys stayed here. Lonnie Pickett's father was a soldier, and he married, Lonnie, he's the guy that flies the airport. I think he's a manager. And his father was from Texas, I remember, because I knew him quite well. And he was stationed up here and married, I can't think of her maiden name, but it doesn't matter. And stayed here, so you see. And but the Army personnel had a big charge of anti-aircraft guns up there. I remember I used to go up there and poke around as close as they'd let you get, because that was just back through the woods from my house, so to speak. And that huge radar tower. I don't know where we can ever find a picture of that. Somebody should have.
Did you ever walk around at the old air station, the Naval Air Station? Did they still have things that were out there?
Oh yeah, all the concrete foundations were there. The jetties are still there. Some of the breakwaters are still there in front of Hoffman's. Used to be Hoffman's house once, right out on the end. Great big house, and the concrete jetties went out there. And for a long time, the pilings were still out there in the water where they had the aircraft ramps going down. There's pilings out there. They're gone now, finally, but every once in a while, some guy running one with his boat he wasn't too happy about. But of course, the Kroll, 80 Kroll or Leafy Kroll, whatever, got the land and hammered up most of the concrete. There's still plenty in there, and of course subdivided the whole place, the whole house lots, which is what it is now. But it was a big expanse of concrete down there. I mean, during the war, my dad was commander of the Outer Cape State Guard, it was called, not National Guard, State Guard, different outfit entirely. These are all civilian guys in their 50s, like the over the hill gang, I used to call them. And they'd practice Sundays. They'd go out and play war games. And one Sunday afternoon was Molotov cocktail days.
All right, let's try that last
But
one.
that's
again.
another story, not the RCA station. So, anything else you want?
Transistors and stuff.
Yeah, well, capacitors,
Vacuum tubes.
capacitors and stuff. Yeah. Actually, what generated the spark gap was a high-speed alternator that was hooked onto the diesel engine, and it was geared up like, I don't know, like 20 to 1, so the diesel would turn 500 and the generator would turn 10,000.
Looks like one of those pictures you see, they're like old computers,
Yeah, right. About as big as the side of the house.
Desktop,
Yeah, today that could be reduced to something about the size of a postage stamp and about as thick. Here comes Louis. Says, "What's going on here?" He's an old dog. Particular vintage. I don't think there's many guys missing out of there. I think the little girl in the picture sitting on the steps is McLean, and she used to live up on the corner of Bay Road and Route 28, North Chatham. On Orleans Road and Bay Road, right there where Joshua Nicholson used to live. I think that is she. If she's